time for questions at the end. So please feel free to keep popping them in the meeting chat, or we'll answer them at the end. So this evening is all about meeting aim 2 of the fund, which is all about tackling our climate and biodiversity emergency. So we'll tell you a bit more about that aim and how you can make a really good answer to that question in the application form. So with that, actually, first of all, I've missed my slide. This is part of our series of webinars that we're running for round 3 of the fund. This is the second to last webinar that we're hosting. So the next and last webinar will be next week, which is all about meeting aim 3 of the fund, which is around encouraging and empowering communities to get involved with nature. So we'll talk about that aim next week. So please do feel free to sign up for that one on Eventbrite, just like you did for this webinar this evening. And that will also be recorded, and all of the recordings for our series of webinars that we've hosted so far will be on our Green Spaces Fund website if you want to go back and watch those. So without further ado, I will hand over to Emma to kickstart our talk this evening about biodiversity.
Thanks, Amy. So we're going to cover biodiversity, and we're going to break it down into the 2 main things about food and shelter. And then we're going to give you some links that might be useful, show you some examples of previous projects, and then we will take some questions if you have them as well. So aim 2 is worth 15% of your application. So it's obviously not as much as aim 1. So if you were on the webinar last week, you'll know that the biggest chunk of scoring is towards benefiting communities in greatest need of quality green space. So that's about improving communities' access to green space and the quality of that green space itself, but also about making it as community driven as possible. The second aim, which is 15%, is all about trying to improve the biodiversity of Greater Manchester and our green spaces through creating new ones or improving ones that are already there. And it's also about trying to adapt the city to climate change. So that might be thinking about drainage, shade provided from trees, hedging to protect from wind, that kind of stuff. But we'll cover it in a bit more detail in a minute. So what is biodiversity then? Well, to split the word down into its basic forms, bio is everything to do with life and diversity is the variety of it. So we're basically talking about the variety of life that you can get in a green space. And we want to know through this fund how you are going to achieve that through your project, because we know that there is a biodiversity crisis in the UK. We have lost 60% of our species across the UK in the last 50 years. But even small things can make a massive difference to that. So even the tiniest garden to the biggest park, they all help with improving our biodiversity and just making the city a better place for both people and for the nature that can live there as well. Thanks, Amy. So we're going to split it down into 2. I'm going to cover food, and then Stephen's going to talk to you a little bit about shelter. And what we mean about food is right from the smallest of the creatures, like our invertebrates and our insects, to the bigger ones, like our mammals and birds. In the past, we've always been focused on things like native plants, but there's a lot of evidence now to say that you can introduce non-native plants as well. They're all a really good source of nectar, but what we just have to be careful about is invasive species. And if your space has got invasive species, we want to be knowing how you're going to be controlling that as well. So things like Himalayan balsam, if you could put controls in through your project to, reduce Himalayan balsam and improve planting in a different way that's beneficial to wildlife, that is great. So there's loads of resources that are available online about providing food for nature. The RHS has got a really good kind of list for perfect for pollinators planting list. And that gives you a really good idea of things that you can put into your green spaces. But we want to give a wide variety of plants with a wide variety of food, so lots of pollen. And the best way to do this is actually really simple, and it is to stop mowing as much as we do. So if you have a green space, I'll give an example of the cricket club that we've been working with in Bolton quite closely. Obviously their primary aim is cricket, but around the edge of their green space, we are going to start leaving the grass to grow a little bit longer and let the plants that are naturally in the seed bank start to come up to the top. And that might be things like dandelions. And we're going to embrace them because although they can, they've got a bit of a bad rep, dandelions, they're actually a really good source of early food for insects. So leaving the grass to grow a bit longer, see what's in there. It provides a good habitat, good home, but also provides a good source of food as well. And other things like gardening without pesticides. Obviously, if we start spraying things all over our green spaces, it can get into the watercourse, it can get into the food system, but also it creates things like aphids are a really good source of food for birds and ladybirds and slugs and snails, and everything feeds everything. So we want to start a nice little ecosystem within our green spaces. And as part of your project for the Green Spaces Fund, we want to know how you're going to do this specifically. So make it as specific as you can. Are you going to improve bulb planting? Are you going to do some tree planting? Are you going to leave sections to grow longer? Are you going to do a wildflower meadow? All these things are a really good step to improve biodiversity. And us as advisors can help you with, deciding what's best for your space whilst maintaining it as a usable space for your group. Thanks, Amy. So the other thing for food is don't be too tidy. We want to leave things within our garden because they can create good habitats, good homes, and good food sources. So things like leaving perennials uncut over winter. Lots of insects take shelter inside the stems. So if we're clearing them, we've obviously removed that as a chance for them to survive over winter. Water is one of the single best things you can do for improving biodiversity and wildlife in a green space. So from the tiniest thing like bucket ponds, which are like a washing up bucket with like rocks and sticks coming out of it, so if anything falls in they can get out. Anything from that, being super tiny has a really big impact, and it provides a source of water for things like hedgehogs and birds to have a bath, and you even get some insects that will live in the water like dragonflies, and then you're going to be benefiting your whole ecosystem. Like we spoke about earlier, wildflower areas, so letting areas of turf grow long encourage these naturally occurring weeds to come to flower. So the best saying is always a weed isn't a weed. What is it? Something like that, Stephen. Is it it's only a weed if you don't want it, or it's a bit more catchy than that, isn't it?
It is, but that's the general theme of it.
Basically, embrace the weeds. Don't worry about them too much. They're a really good source of nectar. It's only a weed if you don't want it in the space. So yeah. And then thinking about things like hedges. So if you've got a fence around your green space that your group uses and your community uses, could you put something like a hedge in front of it? So mixed native hedging is a really good wildlife corridor that links spaces, things between like gardens or between larger green spaces like parks. But they produce flowers in the spring and the summer, so they're benefiting our invertebrates like our flying insects. And then in the winter they produce berries, which the birds can feed off. They also provide good shelter for things like small mammals. So they're a really beneficial thing to think about in your green space. The important thing to kind of draw on in your application is that there's loads of different things that you can be doing for nature that fit alongside your community project. And we want to know how you tie these two things together. Can you make a difference in people's opinions about weeds so that, in the wider community, there's a benefit for invertebrates further away than your green space? But yeah, try and be specific. Tell us exactly what it is that you want to do, why it's going to make a difference, and why it's important to make that change rather than just continue with what's already there. Cool, thanks, Amy.
Okay, thank you. So we've been talking about food there and its importance to biodiversity, and that the importance of creating a sustainable food chain. So the wider variety of plants and animals you've got, and the larger the food chain there is, the more diversity of birds and amphibians and mammals and things you're going to attract to a site, as well as insects and the plants. The next thing to consider is shelter. This is a sort of a simpler way of thinking about habitats. We all think of habitats as being quite large spaces, and we think of woodlands and we think of meadows, lakes and rivers, that sort of landscape scale for habitats. But what we really mean by habitats is the place where something lives, where a particular organism lives, and this can be quite a small scale feature. And in the case of a garden, we're looking at gardens here as an example. It can be an individual thing. So, it could be a woodland if you're talking about a nature reserve and a big park, or it could be a tree if you're talking about a community garden. And all these things provide shelter and sources of food for the organisms we're trying to encourage to increase biodiversity. So if we think about the photograph we're seeing here, we're seeing quite a large bug hotel made out of recycled materials and things that have come out of a community garden. And these provide shelter and a habitat for insects. So it could be insects that are overwintering and hibernating in there. It could be breeding insects. It could just be overnight shelter, and it could be somewhere for predatory insects to live. And again, they provide a food source then for birds and other mammals and amphibians. So, you can think about things like, what do you do with the material you have on site? If you're managing a small park or a nature reserve, you might have a lot of fallen timber, and you might create log piles and habitat piles. This isn't waste material. This decaying wood provides a lot of food and a lot of shelter for things like insects, but as well as things like funguses and lichens and things as well. If you've got a garden and you're starting from scratch, you might think about creating insect and bug hotels like the ones we pictured to the left there in the photograph. If you had a park or a woodland, there might be nesting birds already, but if you don't have trees and you're planting new trees, you might want to put bird boxes up on fences and buildings as well. And these things are things you can do with youth groups, community organisations, part of a workshop where people make these things to take home. They might take a bug box or a bird box or a bat box home with them, and it provides a useful community engagement tool while you're doing it. Can we have a look at the next slide, please, Amy? We're talking here about things like hedges and dead hedges. So again, Emma's mentioned these provide sort of connection between different spaces. If you're looking at a nature reserve, you might be looking at interconnecting different spaces so organisms can travel and shelter, so they're free from predators and they can move around the site. A dead hedge itself, again, is a good way to use materials that you have on the in your garden or your nature reserve or your park or your green space. You don't want to throw anything out. All this stuff provides shelter for things, and it provides a useful barrier. You don't need to spend a lot of money on building a hedge or a fence or a wall if you can use the recycled materials you have. Again, on a garden scale, a compost heap is a great source of increasing biodiversity, and it's a great learning thing for people. It's a great way of talking about recycling and reusing and composting the food waste and the plant waste that we have from gardens and things as well. These are all examples on that sort of garden scale, but as I said, we talk about shelter and habitats, increasing the value of habitat, increasing the variety of it is what increases your biodiversity. The more habitats you have, the different kinds of creatures live in different sorts of habitats, the greater biodiversity's got. And on that sort of park scale, it could be about creating new ponds, new ditches, new waterways, sustainable drainage. That will attract amphibians and insects that you might not have in that space. It might be about planting trees. They have a benefit for climate change. We've talked about the carbon benefits of planting trees. There's more short-term gain in terms of things like providing shelter, both from the sun and from the wind, and in terms of its ability to soak up water and improve drainage, but it's a source of food. And even in one small garden, one tree is a valuable habitat that wasn't there before, whereas in a park it might be you plant a hedgerow of trees or an avenue of trees, and if you've got a nature reserve you might plant a new woodland block. So I think when you're talking about habitats and biodiversity, I think think about the scale. If you are only working on a small space, that scale's important. Planting one tree is a really great way of increasing the habitat value. And if it's a native tree and a native tree species, it's going to have more value than a non-native one that's come like more of an ornamental tree. So if you think about, well, what do I need to plant? At that point, it's worth looking at some websites or talking to some advisors for help about what's the best plants to plant. So I suppose that's where we go on to the next slide. There's some ideas here. Different resources that are available online. Quite a few of these come from our partners at the Royal Horticultural Society. Nina, that's not with us today, works for RHS and she's one of our advisors. It's worth saying that the organisations that provide the advisors for the Green Spaces Fund, so the Wildlife Trusts, Groundwork, City of Trees, RHS, Solar City, we all have website resources that you can look at to get some ideas, or ring us up and ask us for ideas. It's also worth saying there's plenty of other online resources out there as well. So you might be looking at places like the Natural History Museum, you might be looking at the Woodland Trust, the National Trust. There's plenty of information online. I think what you need to think about is scale your project appropriately. When you're putting your grant application together, buying the materials to improve the habitats, buying the plants, buying the seeds, buying the trees, that's all eligible, but actually running the activity as well. So if you need some support to run an activity and you need to bring a tutor in, that's an eligible cost as part of this programme for increasing biodiversity. If you want to run a community tree planting day, a community hedge planting day, a recycling day, or a themed school event, that's all eligible. The costs of running them events and engaging the community is really valuable. Emma mentioned before that you're giving people ideas that they can take back to their own homes, their own gardens, their own community spaces then. A really important thing about biodiversity is connecting places together. The more connected habitats are, the wider mosaic of interconnecting places we have in Greater Manchester, the better, because some animals need a wider range of habitats. If you think about something like a newt, it needs a pond to breed in, but it also needs grasslands and things when it's not breeding to hunt and feed in. So the more we interconnect these habitats across Manchester, the greater it is for biodiversity. So if you can think about your space and how it links into all your neighbours' spaces, you're going to get a higher score on biodiversity as well. So thank you. And we've just got a couple of examples here. If you go to the Green Spaces Fund website, there's a number of examples of projects that have already been funded, and as the projects get delivered, we'll put more information up about them. The project I know about is one in Wigan. There was a group successful in round 2 called the Friends of Low Hall, and they work with Wigan Council to try and encourage new people to come to a nature reserve called Low Hall Nature Reserve in Wigan. Some of the things that they're looking at doing to improve that site, it's a fairly mature woodland that's grown up since coal mining, but it's not in the healthiest condition. So their project's about thinning some of the trees. They're too close together. They're not in a healthy condition, so the biodiversity isn't great. So by thinning them trees, using the woodland material to make dead hedges and barriers, they're creating habitats that way. But then they can let more sunlight onto the forest floor, and they can plant it up with seeds and bulbs and increase biodiversity that way. They're looking at new meadow planting. There's the grasslands haven't been mown properly for a long time, and it's bit of a monoculture of grass, and by mowing that and putting more seed down, they're going to increase biodiversity that way. And they're looking at creating new ponds and things as well. And it's worth saying water is a really good way to increase biodiversity, because not only do things live in the water, but the insects and the amphibians that live in that space provide food for other organisms. So that's what they're doing to increase biodiversity on their site. And then another part of their grant programme is to run a 12-month community engagement programme where they're putting on activities each month to encourage people to visit the site and learn about biodiversity. And that includes things like nature trails, specialist talks like bat walks, even Christmas themed events to try and encourage people to enter the site that way. So think about all these different things to encourage people. Emma, do you have any insight into these projects or project you're
Yeah,
working on?
I do. My screen though seems to be a slide behind, so I can't. I'm struggling to. Anyway, from the top of my head, I know the two projects that are on the screen. So the first one is Ardwick Climate Action. So they're kind of central Manchester. And their project is really interesting because they've thought about how satellite sites, like stepping stones, all linked together to form a corridor between two already established green spaces. So they're trying to link a park with, I think it's like Manchester Met's space. Like there's a park, like a new park near Manchester Met. Anyway, don't ask me about details too much, but the basic idea is that they've got about 10 satellite sites around the area where they are making really good biodiversity improvements, but depending on what space it is. So, for example, they have near the main, is it the A6 or what's the main one that runs through Manchester with the bridges? Right through the centre. It's like a pub quiz. Anyway,
off the top of my head.
I can't remember. Anyway, the big main road that runs through the centre of Manchester, it's got lots of like bridges that goes over, like flyovers. They're going to do some tree planting and hedge planting next to that to try and stop as much pollution coming through to the residential houses on the side. And the tree planting again to try and improve biodiversity for animals as well. They're going to be putting in some native hedging. And they're going to be doing bulb planting in that understory, like Stephen was talking about before, just trying to improve the whole space. But then in a different area, they are going to be putting in wildflower patches. Somewhere else, they have got like a cemetery, and they're going to be looking at different ways that they can plant up the cemetery so that it's providing a good space, a good natural space, but also a place where people can still come and, you know, be with their loved ones. So they're planting things like yellow rattle, which is a really good plant that keeps grasses down, like grass levels naturally lower, but is providing the source of pollen and nectar. So it's a really interesting project because it's on quite a big scale, and they've really thought about how they can link lots of different smaller residential plots together into one larger project. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got the roofs at Bright Meadows. So this is a project that is focused on one specific area. It's quite a small area. It's enclosed at the back of residential houses in Bolton. It's owned by the Housing Association, and previously it was the council depot. So underneath like the layer of leaf litter that's formed into like a soil, there's a layer of hardcore material. So there's not much natural drainage there. So they're going to do a lot of trying to improve the ground and the soil that's there. They're going to do a lot of planting to hopefully, like with trees, to hopefully break up some of the MOT that's there. And their project, because it's so focused on one area surrounded by community, is actually to act as a community forest school, not just for the children that live there, but also for the adults as well, providing sessions throughout the week to help people feel more connected to nature and show that they can make a difference in a very short amount of time in a very big way. And it's really changing a space from what it was, from this concrete kind of very urban space that had been neglected and kind of forgotten about for a number of years, into a really thriving forest garden. So there's two really contrasting projects there, and we've got lots of other examples of like projects that have been taken, you know, in a different direction on a bigger scale, like Parklands, or I think we've got a peatland project that was funded in the previous round as well. So it's very much about trying to choose the best course of action for your space, what's right for your community. You know, how much difference can you make through planting choices or installation of hedges, or, you know, you have to find the things that work for you. And that's where us as a team of advisors can step in and help as well, because we can, you know, think about previous projects or have that chat about what it is that you want to see, what your community want to get out of that space as well.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned scale before, and I think the other thing to consider is your starting point. if your starting point is a smaller space and maybe it is just grass or it's tarmac, hardcore concrete at the moment, the small improvements that you make actually make a very big difference to the biodiversity, because you've gone from very low biodiversity to a much broader sense of biodiversity. There's more habitats, and it could be if you just started with a grass field and there's a lot of amenity grass in areas around housing estates where your site is, planting some trees, putting in bud boxes, doing all that is a vast improvement. Whereas if you were on a nature reserve like the one I talked about, to improve that further for biodiversity, you've got to do a lot more action. The scale's different in terms of the work you do. So it's not just scale in terms of the size of what you're doing, the amount of work you do. I think it's scale appropriate to what your starting point is. And I think when these grants get scored, the panel that score them will take that into account. They're not expecting you to do everything if you're starting from a small space and it's a blank canvas. Right, this is something you do in steps and stages. So don't be frightened about it. If you've got a small area that's a playground or something at the moment and it's got a hard surface, you might be putting some raised planters in. And the act of putting them raised planters in and growing plants, flowers, wherever in that is already increasing biodiversity. If you've got buildings and you put in green roofs on them, that roof didn't have a great deal to offer biodiversity before, and now it does. So yeah, I think that it's scale appropriate in terms of what you're doing in terms of actions and money you're spending, but it's scale appropriate from your starting point as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. And I think we're available to have these conversations and help you out as a group as well, and try and figure out the best course of action and what differences you are able to make, and if it's if it's appropriate, because your community is already telling you probably how they want to use their space. Are they using it for football? So us making vast differences and planting a community orchard probably isn't suitable for that space. But can we continue to keep it as a place where children can play, maybe play the football, but then around the edges, find the balance for bringing in some nature as well. So yeah, it's definitely like a scale thing, like Stephen was saying.
Right. Thanks very much, both. I'm going to stop the recording there so that we've got chance to answer any questions